Revan didn't wait for her opponents to make the first move. The second the enemy Justicar drew her lightsaber, and wasn't that a surprise, Revan blurred into motion. Outnumbered and semi-surrounded as she was, being aggressive was the only way to prevent herself from being slowly picked apart. But she didn't charge the Justicar, no, that would be too predictable. Instead she focused on the third biggest threat, the Asari, with what looked like a heavy repeating blaster of some kind, since the biggest threat was the Justicar and the second biggest was the sniper the group didn't seem to realize Revan knew about. Revan thrust her red blade forward expecting to impale the Asari, only for the blue near-human to jerk to the side unnaturally. Revan narrowed her eyes as she changed her thrust to a slash that bisected the heavy weapon and glanced at the Justicar. That had been a Force technique, not the biotics Revan had grown used to seeing. It seemed her enemy was not just spouting nonsense when she claimed to be a Jedi. The other enemies recovered from Revan's sudden move and opened fire. Revan would have loved to finish off her downed opponent, but she needed to split her focus between deflecting the incoming gunfire, keeping a metaphorical eye on the sniper, and a more literal eye on the Justicar. She simply couldn't risk a lucky shot wounding her this early in the fight to completely eliminate a disarmed opponent. Red and blue sabers twirled as Revan fended off the gunfire, slug throwers, naturally. It would be too convenient otherwise, and moved to engage another assassin. Even if she hadn't killed the first Asari, she had removed her as a major threat. Now Revan needed to cut down the enemy numbers or stop them from freely shooting at her. In the back of her mind, Revan was slightly impressed by the discipline of her attackers. Despite an angry dual saber-wielding Sith bearing down on her, Revan's current target didn't panic or try to run. Even when her shots were almost effortlessly deflected. The instant Revan was close enough, a saber rose and fell. The Force shrieked a warning, but it was late. The sound and scent of sizzling flesh filled the air. The Sith turned her head to look at the suddenly much closer Justicar, given that the Asari had practically teleported even to Revan's senses. You could have defended your subordinate, but you chose to attack me instead. How callous of a self-proclaimed Jedi. I took advantage of an opening in order to remove the stain of the Sith from the galaxy. The Justicar retorted. Letia should be honored to have given me the opportunity. Revan snorted as the now headless Asari slumped to the ground and focused on increasing the reinforcement, allowing her so single-handedly block the Justicar's double-handed strike despite her arms being crossed across her chest. Justifying someone else's suffering as an honor as long as it serves your purposes? Perhaps I was wrong, you'd fit in with some of the Jedi I knew. Further conversation was interrupted by the remaining assassins repositioning and doing their best to avenge their fallen companion. Sith and Justicar separated as an orb of dark energy erupted where they had been standing, the singularity too slow to do more than briefly hinder the Force wielders. At least it only briefly hindered them until both the Justicar and a member of her entourage glowed blue with biotic auras and fired something resembling a shockwave directly at the false black hole. The resulting explosion caught Revan mostly unprepared and sent the Sith flying across the park grounds they were fighting in, but thanks to her personal shields, armor, and using the Force to cushion her fall, she was practically uninjured. Though it seemed she had lost a lightsaber in the process, only the red blade remained in her hand. Keep pressuring her, Huntresses. Without her second blade, she will be on the defensive. Encircle her and whittle her down. You overestimate yourselves. Revan immediately refuted the Justicar's words. Instead of hunching down and guarding herself, the Sith became even more aggressive. Lightning surged from her fingertips towards the Jedi pretender while she charged another Asari. The sudden appearance of electric tendrils forced the Justicar to root herself in place and defend with her lightsaber and stun the remaining Huntresses for only a moment, but in that moment Revan crossed the distance between her and her target and swung her red blade once. The three remaining Huntresses cried out at the death of another one of their members and recklessly opened fire on the Sith, not caring if they risked overheating their weapons as long as they could either wound or kill Revan. The Sith Empress was finally forced to back off as she used her remaining lightsaber to block as much of the incoming fire as possible while keeping an eye on the integrity of her shields for the shots that slipped through. Predictably, thanks to the wild firing of the Huntresses, 2 of their guns vented their heat sinks at the same time, greatly reducing the pressure Revan was under, with the final one being easily defended against until she too overheated her weapon. But just because the Huntresses had lost their cool, the Justicar had not. Before Revan could move to eliminate another target, she was intercepted by a lightning-quick slash that tried to cleave her in half. Rather than meet it head-on, Revan angled her blade and stepped to the side, allowing the Justicar's blade to pass by harmlessly before she riposted with a stab of her own. Block, stab, slash, sidestep, counterattack, jump, force push, block, slash. The 2 Force wielders fell into a complex and deadly dance. Blue and red blades clashed and spun, quickly creating a zone none of the other Asari could interfere with once they had replaced their heat sinks, not without risking hitting the Justicar with a stray shot. Revan's opponent obviously knew that. Now that her team of assassins had reloaded, she was trying to disengage once more so the Asari could open fire again. Something Revan was not inclined to allow. Theoretically, Revan should be at a disadvantage in a close-quarters fight with her heavier armor and after fighting multiple opponents, but reality often laughed at theoreticals. While Revan was not a Mandalorian, she spent nearly as much time in her armor as one. She had grown used to the added weight years ago and still managed to maintain the speed necessary to duel much more experienced Jedi than this knockoff. The other aspect was Revan was simply a better fighter than the Justicar. Even with her focus split between the lightsaber duel and watching the Huntresses for signs of a biotic strike or to simply start firing again, Revan still had the Justicar on the defensive. Was this the best you could do? An ambush followed by this poor display of skill? Revan taunted as she landed a punch on the Justicar's cheek. Dark purple blood spurted from both a gash caused by Revan's gauntlet and from a split lip. For the first self-proclaimed Jedi I've encountered in this galaxy, you've been a massive disappointment. One of the remaining Huntresses opened fire and prevented the Sith from finishing off her opponent, but Revan was not concerned. She had the Justicar's measure. And it fell far short of the opponents she was used to facing. Your arrogance will be your undoing, Sith. The Justicar spat, literally, as she recovered. Your ignorance will be yours. Revan replied. The sound of a lightsaber igniting was almost lost under the sounds of the remaining Asari's gunfire, but the gasp of pain and surprise followed by one of the guns falling silent was attention-grabbing enough to get their attention. Revan could feel the shock and dismay from the others as they watched one of their companions slump over dead, stabbed from behind by the Empress's seemingly discarded lightsaber floating behind her held in an unseen hand. And the Sith was not about to allow the distraction to pass unpunished. She gestured with her free hand and the floating blue blade shot towards one huntress like an arrow while her red blade was turned into a disk of bloody light as she threw it at the other. The Justicar tried to interfere, trying to deflect the projectiles using her own force powers, but caught off guard and with her attention split between the 2 different blades. She failed to deflect either enough to prevent Revan from landing a fatal blow. Yet, instead of frustration or anger at the failure, Revan felt elation radiating off the Justicar. I told you your arrogance would be your undoing. Tell her, now. Ah, the sniper. Revan had been wondering if they were going to merely observe the whole time. Instead they simply had orders to not make a move until Revan showed vulnerability, like if it seemed she was completely disarmed. Snap hiss. Which is why it was a good thing Revan was never foolish enough to completely disarm herself as her third lightsaber ignited and blocked the incredibly heavy round the sniper had fired. While the yellow blade was rarely used beyond the rare instances the Sith had allowed Shepard to borrow it for sparring sessions, it was no less effective than Revan's personal blades. Neither was the small holdout blaster she pulled into her offhand and fired 3 shots back towards the source of the sniper shot, though the odds of those killing the sniper. Revan pushed the thought from her mind and returned the blaster to its holster even as her red and blue lightsabers returned to circle protectively around her. "I believe I said your ignorance would be yours," she calmly told the Justicar. "Now then, it is time to end this." "Oh." Televosir cursed as she stumbled down the hallway of the building she had been using as a sniper nest, her nearly dislocated shoulder sending shooting pains down her arm. Normally she would never use something like the M98 Widow, preferring guns that didn't try to rip her arm off when she fired them, but Kayla had insisted on her using the highest power rifle she could get her hands on. Tella had thought the Justicar was being overcautious. The Widow was meant to take down Krogans and armored vehicles, not single lightly armored fighters. But that was before the Spectre had seen exactly what kind of monster the Justicar had been after. 5 Huntresses, a Council Spectre, and a Justicar. That should have been more than enough to kill anyone caught alone and unsupported. Whatever the hells this Sith was had torn through them instead. Tella swallowed nervously and glanced down at the remains of her sniper scope, where the thin metal casing had warped and deformed from catching one of the blasts her target had snapped off after pulling another of those bullshit swords from her ass. The Spectre didn't know what gun she used or how a handgun managed to be even remotely accurate enough at the range it had been fired, but she did know one thing. If Tella had been just a few inches to the side, that bolt would have caught her in the forehead instead of her scope. Monster. That thing was a monster. And to make things worse, all Tella could do without a working rifle was follow the instructions Kayla had given her and watch the Justicar fight for her life through the several cameras they had set up before the confrontation. Kayla Trosser was a blur speed and grace, fending off 2 magically floating swords even as she fought the Sith. Vosir was one of the most physically fit Asari in the galaxy, her job demanded her to be, but compared to the Justicar she would have been as slow and clumsy as an Elcor. But it wasn't helping. All those feats of near supernatural skill and athleticism, her biotic might, and even the other powers Kayla had briefly shown off meant nothing as the Justicar was forced firmly on the defensive. The Sith seemed to know exactly what Kayla was going to do before she even did it. Feints, slashes, stabs, and even unarmed strikes were countered. Pieces of scenery were somehow ripped up and thrown at the monster but were stopped or redirected before they got close. And biotics seemed to splash over some sort of unseen dome or shield. Kayla was tiring. And the monster seemed to just march indomitably forward. The yellow blade was returned to wherever it had been hidden and the red and blue ones were back in the Sith's hands. At this point, all Kayla could do was fend off the inevitable. The glowing blades continued to clash long enough for Tella to reach the skycar they had stashed for her to leave the scene in, and the Spectre considered disobeying the Justicar's orders to just ram the whole thing into the monster. But just as she started the vehicle, she knew that she would be too late. Kayla made a mistake. And the Sith had removed her right hand for it, the one that had been holding her lightsaber. Tella could only watch as the two seemed to talk to one another, but the cameras hadn't been wired for sound and Kayla's comm wasn't connecting. Whatever conversation the two had, it wasn't very long. Or at least Kayla didn't intend to drag it out. She made one desperate gesture for her fallen blade. And was stabbed through the heart when the Sith closed the distance faster than the lightsaber could return to her remaining hand. Tella let out a few more curses at that and pulled out the special communicator Kayla had stored in the skycar. A final contingency if she was killed and the Sith survived. She waited until it connected and said one word. Nightfall. ... Understood. Proceed to these coordinates, there will be someone to debrief you. Were you able to recover Night Trosser's weapon? Night? No, that wasn't important right now. But Tella did remember Kayla giving the Huntresses orders to retreat with her lightsaber if she was killed before they were. No, I was on Overwatch. No one else survived. No one? I see, this is a bigger threat than we expected. Head to those coordinates, Spectre. May the Force and the Goddess be with you. The first thing Revan did after she confirmed there were no more surprises waiting for her was leave the area and try calling the Normandy crew. Yes, her assailants had called her out specifically. But that didn't mean there weren't other teams tasked with killing Revan's allies just in case the attack on her failed. It took several tries to get out from under the jamming effect. Whatever the Asari used must have been really high-end, but once she was, her comms were assaulted by a flood of messages from various contacts. Most of them were attempts to contact her with little extra information attached, but the last one was a message from Shepard. Apparently Revan wasn't the only one having issues with assassins today. Shepard's friend Liara had been attacked by mercenaries hired by the Shadow Broker. The Asari had been investigating the broker's identity and location and either got too close or was being used as a message, but either way Shepard had decided leaving the planet quickly was the best way to deal with a small army after them. She had mentioned that if anyone wanted to come along she would hold the ship for half an hour, but Revan was nowhere near the docks. It looked like she would be separating from the Normandy crew without a formal farewell. Unfortunate, but they would see each other when Shepard dropped off Talizora. The Sith Empress simply didn't have time to run off on a mission to protect a single information broker right now. She had 2 previously hostile races to integrate into a single empire and now a hidden Jedi sect to hunt down, which were going to be headaches on their own. Putting those off would only make them worse too, especially the Jedi sect. As much as it would entertain her to dump a video of an Asari dressed up like a Justicar trying to assassinate a head of state with a kill team, not many people would care at the moment. Sith Empress of the Quarians and Geth sounded impressive, but in reality Revan had very little power associated with the title right now. The various politicians in the galaxy were definitely cautious about the re-merging of the 2 races after 300 years of conflict, but beyond that single accomplishment Revan herself was an unknown. The Geth would follow her with little effort thanks to their nature, the promises she made, and the updates they received from Legion, but the Quarians had very little trust in her. The only thing keeping them from splitting off and remaining independent was the fact Revan was offering them the single thing their entire race desired, the return of their homeworld. Revan could bring the assassination attempt to light, simply dump it on the extranet and let the fire spread from there, but all it would accomplish is cause the Asari Republic to disavow the Jedi as someone using the Justicar uniform as a false flag and make the Quarians nervous. She needed to actually spend some time ruling them before the thought of their Empress coming under attack sparked the desire for retribution that would make further assassination attempts a risk for those attempting them rather than a passing event for the rest of the galaxy. No time like the present then. Legion, are you still at the warehouse? Yes, Revan Empress. Good. The transport ship should be there momentarily. As soon as it is, start loading the cargo and prepare to leave. Keep an eye out for potential enemies. It seems we've run out our welcome on Ilium. Understood. Are we returning without Creator Talizora? Unless Shepard is waiting for us in orbit we will probably have to. Revan replied. But if the Shadow Broker is after their friend they might stay radio silent until they can hide her or pay him off. Liara was essentially evicted from the planet without enough time to retrieve the databases she had built up. Without those she would be starting from scratch if she was going to attempt searching for the Shadow Broker again. Enough credits or a favor owed from a famous figure like Shepard should be plenty to get the mysterious information broker to back off. Provided Liara agreed to some conditions, of course. Oh. There's hagglers. The oceans boil during the day, then snap freeze 10 minutes after sundown. Liara commented as they watched the planet grow closer on the monitor. The entire planet was a series of seemingly never-ending storms that raged across the surface, throwing lightning strikes miles long. Shepard frowned as the turbulence grew worse. The Shadow Broker lives in this? His ship follows the sunset. Completely undetectable in the storm, unless you know where to look. How do we get inside? The shuttle bay is locked down. We'll need to land on the ship and look for a hatch. Liara explained. But we can't stay outside for long. There's a constant lightning storm where the hot and cold air collide, then we'll move quickly. Shepard said shortly and began checking over her gear. Shepard, Don't, Liara. Shepard interrupted. You were the one that wanted to stay focused on the mission. Get in, get Ferron, get out. Kill anything in the way. The Spectre wasn't exactly thrilled with her friend at the moment. She had hoped the last meeting with Liara had been an outlier, but the Asari scientist had truly changed over the past 2 years. The sincere, slightly naive young maiden had been completely buried under the cold information broker facade she now wore, and it had killed a lot of Shepard's hopes that the two of them could salvage what was left of their budding relationship from 2 years ago. Liara was absolutely right that 2 years of grieving didn't just vanish, but when someone's personality changed so much that you barely recognized them, did you really know them at all? Shepard had known Revan for slightly less time than she had Liara on their hunt for Soren, but the commander knew that the Sith despised innocents getting caught in the crossfire of organizations. For all she disagreed with Revan's big-picture approach to most problems, Shepard knew the Sith would take steps to make sure the damage was as light as possible even if it made things more difficult for her. Liara had recently written off teams of Shadow Broker agents killing their way through the city as a good distraction. Maybe it had been a deflection from how she really felt, maybe it had been a slip of the tongue, it could have even been an act she was used to keeping up. Whatever it actually was, Shepard decided to listen to Liara's advice and focus on the mission. Personal feelings could be soothed later, or re-evaluated if it came to that. It wouldn't be the first time Shepard had lost friends over some poor word choices after time and trauma changed them or her. Of course, most of the exterior machinery will be maintenance equipment. Our best bet will be to find an entrance by the more protected areas, likely towards the back shielding. Shepard finished her equipment check and did her best to settle in and listen to Liara's brief despite the shuttle's shaking. But part of her couldn't help thinking that they were supposed to be celebrating a successful mission right about now, not jumping into another one on short notice. Hopefully the team members they needed to leave behind made it off Ilium without too much trouble. No one had been able to reach Revan during the rush back to the Normandy, which worried the commander. The Sith had been simply finalizing some details for the trip back to the migrant fleet. There shouldn't have been a reason for her to ignore all attempts to reach her. Shepard gave herself a mental shake. She could worry about her fellow squad leader later. Right now she needed to keep her mind focused on what she could affect right now. Oh. Ryasha Rouse was close to a mental breakdown. It had been a completely normal day on Ilium, yet in the last 3 hours half of Nose Astra seemed determined to tear the capital city apart in some kind of shadow war. Normally Ryasha would have written the whole thing off as the various corporations jockeying for a better negotiating position and let the various contract enforcement branches take a chunk of credits out of the offenders, but then she had heard who exactly was involved. Commander Shepard, the possibly disgraced, possibly not Council Spectre that had been rumored dead only to come back just as suddenly. Even if Ryasha had managed to get the human in custody, there was no way she would dare to actually level charges. That was a good way to end up dead, since the Council really didn't like anyone else touching their Spectres without their permission or very strong evidence that the Spectre in question had gone rogue. And as far as she knew, Shepard had nothing like that announced. Liara Tsoni, on the surface a middling-tier information broker that was shifting careers after a rather spotty record with archaeology. Swapping careers was not an uncommon act for maidens after getting in over their heads, though Ryasha would have expected the maiden to choose something more physical like dancing or mercenary work after failing an intellectual field. But Liara was also at Tsoni. Her mother might have pissed a lot of people off with her support of Arterius, but Benenzia had been one of the most powerful matriarchs in the galaxy and had a lot of friends, even after her death. Even more blackmail too. If she had given that to Liara, maybe it made more sense for the girl to play at being a broker. And then there was the Shadow Broker, one of the most untouchable forces in the galaxy simply because of the service they provided. Everyone wanted information and secrets that belonged to their opponents after all. And as long as you could cough up the credits, the Shadow Broker would deliver. The problem with that was you often found out a previously trusted subordinate just so happened to be an agent of theirs at the worst possible moment. Ryasha's secretary had suppressed the notifications to security forces about a small army shooting Nose Astra up until it spread to every vidcast show on the planet. Ryasha could certainly blame the broker, but even if everyone believed the damage was not her fault, she would still be held responsible simply because the broker was too valuable to lose access to. If that was all, it would have been a massive headache, but something that could be eventually suppressed or spun into something that no one would care about in a few years. But then Ryasha was handed a report that a Justcar had been found dead in a park along with a team of huntresses with no sign of their enemy, and now Ryasha had to very seriously consider that her planet might become the front line to an actual war between the Asari Republic and the Shadow Broker. Shepard was known to have picked up a Justicar for her team somehow, and Liara had been seen fleeing with a Spectre on the other side of the city, so it would take a very large bribe to spin either of them being the killer, which meant the only realistic party Ryasha could pin the blame on when the Republic inevitably called to demand why one of their most venerated agents was killed on what should have been a safe world was the Shadow Broker's forces. It was something that was almost guaranteed to end in either Ryasha's dismissal or death, but there was nothing she could do. The best she could hope for was that the broker and the Republic could come to a backroom deal soon that would leave the bigger players satisfied, and she provide a scapegoat for the Justicar that would let her keep her life and cushy position at the same time. In fact, Ryasha had an idea. All she needed to do was find the camera footage from the area around the Justicar and selectively pull a few individuals that looked dangerous enough to have a chance at ambushing a Justicar and replace the actual assailants with them. With some luck, she could push the blame onto a few small mercenary teams and not the Shadow Broker's agents. She quickly wrote up the new orders and sent them off to a few agents she hoped she could trust, praying to the goddess she wasn't just giving another infiltrator more ammunition to get her removed. "Oh, it's gotten pretty crowded lately," Rosukida Vassauon commented casually as his group waited in line at the cafeteria. Quarian ships tended to be crowded at the best of times, but with so many returning to the fleet, the problem had only gotten worse. Roshu could barely walk through the halls at times because of how many people were trying to pass by. Not surprising. The admirals called back everyone they could to resettle Rannoch. Rheinmalan replied. Not all of them had ships of their own, so they're getting packed anywhere that has room. I hear even the live ships are running out of space. Can you blame them? We're going back to Rannoch. I'd have dropped everything too. Kansorel exclaimed. We really lucked out, the Empress was so generous. No more war, new tech to examine, and our home back. She really saved us. Are you joking? She's exploiting us with our own planet. Huai Luma shot back. I don't trust her either. Shows up out of nowhere and accuses the admirals of all that nonsense. If she didn't have some leash on the Geth, we should have just shot down her shuttle and taken Rannoch back ourselves. You mean the very clearly documented and proven manipulation of Tali'Zora's trial to forward their political agendas? Roshu quirked his head. I don't like some alien deciding they are in charge any more than you, but except for Shayla, the admirals pretty obviously stabbed Talai in the back. But the Empress straightened them out. Ken insisted. She's clearly a good person. Huli snorted. Yeah, right. But, Roshu continued before the two could keep arguing. I have to admit, Empress Revan has been holding up her end of the deal pretty well so far. Those Geth ships have been providing a lot of material we were pretty desperate for. Even with all the people coming back, I think the ships are running more smoothly than they have in decades. Do you think they'll keep them around when we get to Rannoch? Ryan asked the group softly. We'll have a planet again. We won't need them. The group was silent for a bit as they realized, despite any misgivings, life for every Quarian was going to change in a way unprecedented for over 300 years. We'll still need them, Huli eventually said. Revan said those Reaper things were on the way, right? We'll need the heavy fleet at the least for that. Plus vessels for shipping and transport. The migrant fleet might not be around after this, but our ships won't just disappear. They'll be better than ever. Ken added, ever the optimist. With a proper dock we can even do some refits. Maybe even build new ships. I got a look at the designs for something called a harrower.